Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, Tor has just played King e7, and Kasparov now continued with the forcing continuation. Rook takes a7, and after rook takes a7, rook e1, which forces bishop g5. If instead bishop a3 is the only other move that doesn't lose the bishop immediately, now comes rook a1, creating a pin that's impossible for black to break, and white will be able to force the winning of a piece here. So that's obviously no good. So bishop g5 is what Tor played. Now comes knight takes g5, f takes g5, and here a very strong continuation from Kasparov, which he had seen presumably several moves before. Again, if you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Knight takes e5 is the move, and now white is well ahead after d takes e5. If instead rook a3, pinning the bishop, now white is winning with knight g6, double check from the knight and the rook, and gives black only one feasible move, which is king d8. Now rook e3, and black may as well resign. There's no h takes g6 because of h7, and black can't stop this pawn from queening. So d takes e5 anyway, and now white has bishop takes e5, and here he's completely winning, and he's threatening, of course, bishop takes b8 with a check from the rook, which would win back the invested material with interest. Knight d6 is the best way for black to defend. If he tries instead rook a3 check, now comes king g4 with the same threat as before, bishop takes b8 with check, and also threatening now the g pawn. And if knight d7, then bishop b2 check will win the rook and the game. So knight d6 is best for black. But now comes f6 with check, and with this move white is nearly 5 pawns ahead in the position, incredibly. The king is tied to defending the knight, so king d7 is just about forced. But now comes a bishop takes d6, king takes d6, rook e6 check, king c7, f7. And how can black stop the f pawn? And the answer is that he can't. Tor tried rook a1 with the idea of rook f1 check, winning the queen if white now promotes, but Kasparov simply played king e2, and Tor resigned as his position is hopeless. He can throw in a few checks, but they come to nothing. For example, rook a2 check, king e3, rook a3 check, king e4, and the checks have run out. If black tries knight d7 to capture, if white promotes, now it's a forced mate with a d6 check. And if the king goes to the 8th rank, then rook e8 check is winning, and if it stays on the 7th, then rook e7 wins. For example, king b7, rook e7, which is threatening to win the knight with check, and only the king can defend it, so king c8, now rook takes d7, king takes d7, and the pawn queens, and it's mate m4 now at the most. For example, rook a8, queen e7 check, king c8, queen c7, and mate. So it's another fine example of utilizing the space advantage from the great champion Garry Kasparov. Okay, on to our last example for this segment. This position was This position was reached after white's 28th move in a game between Soviet Boris Avrukh and the now German GM Rustem Dortev at the Istanbul Olympiad in the year 2000. Black has a small advantage due to his better bishop. The white bishop is fairly useless and passive, just targeting its own central pawns here from b2, whilst the black bishop has more active options. Black also has more space, which of course is what I want to focus on for this video. A draw would be a reasonable assessment of the position as it is now. However, with superb endgame skill, Dortov is able to exploit his positional advantage. a3 is the move that gets his idea underway, and as we saw with Kasparov in the last example, Dortov is willing to place the pawn on the same color square as his bishop in order to gain space. It's a good move also because it forces the response knight f takes e4. If instead bishop a1, now knight takes f2, king takes f2, b4, and the bishop on a1 now is even worse than it was before, with absolutely zero future prospects. Whereas if instead bishop c1, now knight c3 check, and white is losing his a-pawn and faced with a very dangerous passed a-pawn from black, and this would be a relatively easy win, in fact. So knight f takes e4 is forced. Now d takes c4, bishop c1, and f5, just defending the pawn. Knight b1, targeting the a-pawn, so of course b4. Now knight d2, redeploying the knight to a better square, but this allows black a nice response that's in accordance with the principles we looked at in the last segment. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. g5 is the move, immediately opening up a second front. Now black has a big edge bordering on a pawn. g3 is the best bet for keeping everything solid, but now comes knight d5, threatening knight c3 check, winning a pawn. So knight c4, threatening to take the bishop with check. So bishop c7, which opposes the knight, as now there's two squares between them, so the knight and the bishop as well actually have no forward movement, but the idea of this is to control the knight's forward movements. So yeah, it's a handy trick to know actually. With two squares in between bishop and knight, you can control your opponent's pieces. So bishop d2 anyway, stopping knight c3 check. Now king f7, which is getting the king involved, which is always a good idea in endgame, as I said. Now king f2, king g6, king g2, just making sure the black king can't invade on the light squares here on the king side. Now h5 and h4, trying to keep everything locked up and play for a draw, but this move must have been a difficult decision, because after g takes h4 and g takes h4, the h4 pawn is a weakness that white will have to look after. However, if white just waits around instead and plays, for example, instead of h4 at this stage, king f2, now h4, and the black king can come around to g4 with a much improved position for black and good prospects thanks to the king activity. So h4, g takes h4, g takes h4. Now king f7, king f2, and bishop d8, immediately targeting the h pawn and forcing, if not now, on the next move, king g3. Now bishop e7, stopping any checks from the knight, whilst at the same time overprotecting the vulnerable b4 pawn. So king h3, which is the best move that white has. And so it seems that white can shuffle his king and his pieces backwards and forwards and wait for his opponents to offer the draw, but unfortunately for Avrukh that wasn't the case, as Dortov came up with a brilliant conception. If you want to try and figure it out, then stop the video now. As opposed to being one move, it's like a strategy for winning the endgame. King e8 is the first move in a winning plan, and the difference here between the two sides is that the white king is tied to defending the h-pawn, and the black king is free to move, which is a certain advantage, and you'll see why in just a moment. Avrukh tried to nip this problem in the bud with bishop e1, but Dortov of course had considered this course of action, and he brings his king over further up the board now, the king's side. And Avrukh is just moving his bishop backwards and forwards, trying to keep everything solid. Now king c6, and it's unclear really why he didn't play this move sooner. Perhaps it was to get some time on the clock, so the position was identical to this two moves before. He could have moved his king to c6 sooner. So I guess it was to get time on the clock, but there's no way to know. So knight e5 check, king b5, now knight c4, and now the key move in Dortov's plan, which is knight c3, which is a deeply conceived and very calculated idea, and a pawn sack essentially, because now knight takes a3 check is playable, because after b takes a3 there's bishop takes c3, but now the winning move in the whole conception, bishop b4, which is the whole idea behind playing knight c3, and now white is unable to avoid the king and pawn ending. He has to take here. If instead bishop a1, now bishop d2, threatening to win e3, and best play goes d5, he takes d5 and bishop d4, apparently keeping everything solid and retaining drawing chances. But now comes bishop e1, where bishop f6 is most advisable, but now bishop f2 forces bishop d4, and now the killer king b4, and white is in zugzwang. He can't move any of his pawns, and if he moves the king, then h4 is falling. And the bishop is tied to the defense of the e3 pawn, but if it retreats down this diagonal, then the king is going to penetrate here on the queen side and mop up these pawns. So no matter what white plays, he will lose in due course if he doesn't take after bishop b4, so he has to take. Okay, that's the end of part 2.